I'm beginning to think that maybe being locked up for 5 years was the best thing that ever happened to me. Although I do harbour some anger towards Wiltshire Police and the security services for the way they railroaded me into the asylum, I do believe it was a very educational experience. And for much of that time, I felt very at home there. Indeed, society is not so phony in the psychiatric hospital as it is on the street. I was just sitting in Warminster town centre, and I was thinking it's a very nice sunny day, but everyone looks miserable. Everyone looks very miserable, and I believe this is due to the nature of the British mind in the modern world. It's an envious nature, and everyone is envious of each other, and therefore they can't experience happiness because they're too deep in envy. Also, there is a ongoing informant culture, especially in these small towns, and the reason for the informant culture also has to do with the deep envy that British people feel for one another, which is a very sad state of affairs indeed. Indeed, I was just thinking of the network of Russian mental patients that I'm very interested in. Indeed, towards the end of the Cold War, the KGB started realizing that schizophrenics could be of serious intelligence use. So they decided to basically recruit a team of Russian mental patients from the institutions and give them an intelligence task. Indeed, they gave them thousands of pages of documents from the Russian archives dating back at least 200 years on secret societies in Britain and Europe in the 1700s. And the remit for this network was to study these secret societies in Britain and Europe during the 1700s specifically and see what conclusions they could come to. However, the schizophrenic mind being what it is, these Russian schizophrenics began to piece together the entire plot of the secret societies from the 1700s and how the plots that were hatched then were relevant to the modern era and basically how things were going to play out. Indeed, this led to much criticism of the Soviet Communist Party by these Russian mental patients. And indeed, the KGB decided that it had to shut the project down. And I do not know exactly what happened to this network of Russian mental patients, but I feel as if I am continuing their work. And in tribute to them, I shall continue to work on their theories and the topics which they were tasked to study. Indeed, in the last video, I explained about the Mad Housekeepers Guild, and I wonder if this network of Russian mental patients came across the Mad Housekeepers Guild having access to proper Russian intelligence archives, they would have come across that network. Indeed, there is nothing in the public domain about the Mad Housekeepers Guild. As I stated, I heard about the Mad Housekeepers Guild under the term Asylum Keepers Guild from a mental patient during my first hospitalization. And I would like to go further into this network at some point. However, being only having access to public domain information at the moment, I believe this is going to be difficult. However, you can begin to trace these networks through networks such as the German Rite of Strict Observance, various German Rosicrucian networks from the 1700s, and of course, the Bavarian Illuminati, which I believe had a psychocratic inner sanctum. Indeed, Weishaupt was just the front man, and Weishaupt was a Jesuit trained son of a Hebrew rabbi, and he was put in the position that he is now known to history due to his Hebrew heritage, so that researchers would, when studying this network, believe that the Bavarian Illuminati was a Hebrew network, when it was not. The inner sanctum were of German heritage and were deeply connected to British intelligence. Indeed, these networks interlink together, and they position Frankists as frontmen in these organizations, specifically so that researchers will trip up and believe that the conspiracy is a Hebrew one, when it is not. As I have explained in several previous videos, this theory, and I believe this to be true. Indeed, much of the conspiracy research on the internet is geared towards this hoax, basically. And of course, the notorious Protocols text that was conceived by, so say, Russian intelligence, but there was certainly a network of British intelligence and indeed Scotland Yard and most probably German intelligence involved in the creation of the protocols, which is probably a genuine document, but the details have been changed so that people are led to believe it is a Hebrew document when it is probably protocols pertaining to the original Bavarian Illuminati networks and their technocracy ideals. Indeed, I had come across the theory that the protocols were actually conceived by the proto-Bavarian Illuminati networks in 1773, and that there was some degree of involvement by the House of Petty Fitzmaurice. Indeed, it was the House of Petty Fitzmaurice who set up the British police force. They are based out of Bowood House, near my hometown of Calne, and therefore I am effectively a vassal of theirs if we are looking at things in the traditional manner. And indeed, the current head of the House of Petty Fitzmaurice is one Charles Petty Fitzmaurice, who is one of the overarching heads of MI5 with much influence in Scotland Yard. And he is closely connected to a man who I have met, Robert Gascoigne Cecil, who is the titular head of MI6, and he oversees the Director General, who is Blaise Metravelli, who, as I've explained, is the daughter of a Banderist, and thereby deeply connected to Deutsche Verteidigungs networks. Indeed, the Deutsche Verteidigungs have a lot of influence within British intelligence, and there are still Nazi networks within British intelligence, and she is evidence of that. Indeed, these networks of British intelligence like to put out theories regarding the control of the world by Hebrews, but this is not actually the case, as the Frankist networks and the Rothschild consortium are semi-autonomous and are actually controlled by British intelligence and the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst. All of their activities are basically controlled, though they are granted a degree of autonomy. The British and German networks now believe that their activities are causing problems for the cryptocracy due to their obvious nature, and therefore the British and German networks are planning to shut down the Frankist intelligence networks and the Rothschild consortium. Indeed, it seems to me that British intelligence is possibly one of the most evil networks ever to have walked the face of the earth. Indeed, Dame Stella Rimington was a truly awful human being, and she has murdered so many of her own she murdered in her lifetime. She died recently. She murdered so many of her own agents for petty faults against her person, basically. And she was Director General of MI5 at one point, and those networks are basically Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst run networks that she was running. Indeed, they were very much Nazi fetishists, basically, the networks around Dame Stella Rimington. Indeed, the networks around the former Director General of MI6, John Scarlett, were also Nazi fetishist networks. Indeed, the royal family itself has a high degree of Nazi fetishism, but it's interesting how German philosophy seems to be at the forefront of the cryptocratic drive for the technocratic order. And that links back to the Mad Housekeepers Guild, this strain of German philosophy that comes through from the 1700s all the way through the Bismarck era, through the era of Kaiser Wilhelm, through the Nazi regime, and into the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst grafting itself onto the Anglo American and French intelligence structures at the end of the Second World War. Though at the end of the Second World War, the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst also grafted itself onto Russian intelligence. Indeed, in the early 1800s, Prussian and Russian intelligence were interchangeable, and later German and Russian intelligence were basically interchangeable. What with the German intelligence networks and in latter days the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst having controlling percentages of Russian intelligence. And the Cold War was basically overseen by the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, with Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst agents having controlling percentages of both Anglo American and Russian, Soviet intelligence networks. And scientists of Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst cells being embedded in both American and Soviet defense programs, as well as British and French. Indeed, it seems the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst were basically controlling the Cold War, and they basically started it also, because the threat of Soviet invasion of the West, which is mirrored today in the so-called Russia threat hoax. The myth of the Soviet threat to the West was built up by the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst networks around around the Gehlen organization, led by the Order of Malta Hospitaller Reinhard Gehlen. And basically the Russian troops, Soviet divisional troop strength was hoaxed. And it was basically constructed by the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst that the Soviets were going to invade West Germany from their bases in East Germany. But what's interesting is that the East German intelligence cryptography, especially around the Stasi, was controlled by the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, and they were feeding false information through the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst to the West without the knowledge of the Russians, interestingly. So basically, the Anglo American networks declared the Iron Curtain, and the Cold War ensued. And the legacy of this is the current climate, whereby there are constant news reports about Russia threatening nuclear war and Russia threatening World War III with the United Kingdom. And this is part of the overall hoax constructed funnily enough, by German elements of the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, which is most probably an intellectual agenda devised by the psychocrats of the Mad Housekeepers Guild. Indeed, this serves to keep the defense industry going and maintain the military-industrial complex. And basically, through operations such as Gladio, the state can maintain strong power, and the cryptocracy are therefore embedded in their positions and can implement their surveillance and digital state via a technocracy. And the so-called Russian threat is a myth created by the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, who have embedded themselves within British and American and French intelligence structures. And therefore, we are being completely hoaxed. Indeed, it's a similar situation with the Faith of Ishmael fundamentalist networks. Indeed, they are under the control of the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, and the so-called war on terror was a construct devised by the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst to basically cause a dialectic within the Western nations and cause a certain degree of chaos that would enable the techno-fascist state to arise, which is the dream of the networks such as the Mad Housekeepers Guild and their Bavarian Illuminati progeny. And this is the continuing saga. Indeed, the British intelligence networks seem to have an overwhelming obsession with Russia, and there are elements within Russia that wish to at least keep the Cold War, as it is Cold War II now, going, because they are able to maintain power themselves in Russia by keeping the Cold War going. And so it's basically the same concept in both countries. Indeed, this network of Russian mental patients figured out that elements within the KGB were keeping this Cold War going. And these elements of the KGB were themselves linked to the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, who began the hoax in the first place. And with these Russian mental patients figuring this out and having worked out the plan of the networks, such as the Mad Housekeepers Guild and the Bavarian Illuminati from the 1700s via studying secret societies from the 1700s, which were themselves intelligence networks. And by working out all of these plans, these Russian mental patients found themselves in a very dangerous position. And I do not know exactly what happened to them. They disappeared in some way. However, there are probably networks keeping these theories alive. And I am in communion, basically, with these networks, philosophically. And indeed, I believe in some way they may be helping me, as there have been various synchronicities which have proved this to me. But I'm not going to go into that, because that would reveal to the cryptocracy that I am not alone. Indeed, it seems that the British intelligence networks' obsession with Russia dates back to the 1500s, when the British Muscovy Company, which was basically similar concept to the British East India Trading Company, the British Muscovy Company, tried to basically bully the Muscovite monarchy into allowing tariffs whereby all goods created in Muscovy would have a tax imposed on them, whereby the British Muscovy Company would control basically the production and export and import of everything to do with Muscovite trade. And the Tsar at the time refused the offers of the British Muscovy Company. And this began the Great Game, which continues today with Cold War II and the potential hot war, which elements within the Anglo American cryptocracy and the Russian cryptocracy wish to motivate into a hot war, though this is all part of the vision and agenda of the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, who themselves have roots in the Madhouse Keepers Guild and networks such as the Bavarian Illuminati. And therefore, they have a vested interest in seeing America and Britain, and on one side, and Russia on the other, basically at each other's throats. And this is a continuing process. And I'm not entirely sure how things are going to play out. Indeed, Russian intelligence is so riddled with British intelligence, the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst, and networks that wish to continue the great game, that it seems that not much can be done. And it is best to remember the network of Russian mental patients who were, in the end, most probably killed off by the KGB when they figured out the entire plot of the secret societies from the 1700s, both British and German, especially surrounding the Madhouse Keepers Guild and Bavarian Illuminati and Rite of Strict Observance and Freemason networks. And they figured all of this out and how this links to the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst and the fact that the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst was basically controlling the Cold War. And may I reiterate, the Deutsche Verteidigungsdienst were controlling the Cold War, not the Hebrew and Frankist networks. So, yes, I'm going to leave it there. That was a rather interesting 22 minutes. Thank you.